Next, we bring you Dan Kraemer. Dan is the Chief Design Officer of iCollaborative. He'll be sharing how to protect your business and accelerate innovation in the new normal. This couldn't be more relevant for the current times. Dan, over to you.
Today, I'm going to talk about how to protect your business and accelerate innovation in what is becoming our collective new normal. So first, a little bit about iCollaborative. We're designers, researchers, business strategists, engineers, architects, all collaborating to uncover new behaviors through human-centered research, create growth strategies, and build new businesses. And we're doing this for our clients that are the Global 500, leaders in their industries like you, Nike, Samsung, Airbnb, FedEx. And many of our recent projects that we initiated with these clients pre-COVID have been rapidly accelerated in priority. And it's all happening during this pandemic. We're moving from innovation pipeline to becoming business frontline. So for example, we helped shift Audi's North American business from car ownership to digital membership of the brand. We helped Airbnb become a more resilient company by defining what trust means in service and defining new paths to new offerings. Or we also accelerated the business that's leveraging VR as a way to do contactless surgical prep and learning. So based on our experience working with these companies and many others, I can tell you firsthand that the design and innovation mind is more essential than ever. And why is this? Well, it's because every day since the pandemic started, and I'm sure you're experiencing this too, business leaders are being tasked with, one, reinventing their core, anticipating change, and then also capitalizing on these unexpected market shifts. And that's a lot to do all at the same time. So as business leaders, we have a really important charter, and it's really two main areas of focus. First is anticipating accelerated change, and we're going to dive into our accelerated futures model that we created at IA that helps you anticipate the massive and lasting effects of COVID, specifically how it will apply to your business and your industry. And second, prototyping future business. And this is a time with so many things are changing, we have a lot to learn, and we want to prototype our businesses before we launch them and scale them, taking smart risks, capturing new opportunities as demand continues to rapidly shift and evolve. So let's first talk about anticipating accelerated change. So at iCollaborative, we've been working to apply our design thinking approach to COVID in this era and translating it into actionable strategies for organizations across multiple industries. And I suppose many of you probably feel as though a lot of our clients and colleagues do, that we are in such a moment in history that is so unique that past rules simply don't apply. I'll tell you, this really isn't true, because if you understand human behavior and you study how civilizations have responded during times of similar crises and similar stress, you actually can project a bit of what's coming next. Now, I'll give you an example. So during a global pandemic, who would have thought that when we were being told to be 6 feet apart, that we would all join together in protest across the country? Well, actually, we did anticipate this, and we did this because we studied patterns that emerged in similar previous events. In fact, we learned that most pandemics actually do cause civil unrest. This happened in H1N1, Ebola, the Russian plague, and even if you go as far back as the Black Death, it happened. And we spent thousands of hours researching past behaviors and applying it to projections and models for the future. Ultimately, we created what we call the accelerated futures model. And it's, like mentioned, to help companies like you anticipate the change and be first to market. So I'll play a quick, it's like a 2-minute video that helps explain the model.
It may seem as though the COVID-19 pandemic has created a moment in history so unique that past rules and patterns don't apply. This just isn't true, which is why IA Collaborative created the Accelerated Futures Model. Our team of behavioral researchers, business strategists, and designers found patterns by studying what we call mass pivot points in history, ones that create abrupt, forceful, and indelible change, including the 1918 flu, World War II, Watergate, and the '08 recession. We learned that mass pivot points don't create change at random. Rather, mass pivot points speed up change that was already inevitable. A quintessential example of this is World War II and its association with women in the workforce. It's not accurate to say this mass pivot point was the reason women are in America's labor force today. Rather, it was a massive accelerant to that inevitable future. See, societal currents specific to women in the workforce already existed pre-World War II. There were shifting attitudes around women's role in society and new systems making it easier for women to gain employment. Then, due to the constraints of World War II, the female labor force grew 50% in a few years, something that might have taken decades otherwise. So let's visualize this. Here we have visualized change that is occurring across societal currents of needs, attitudes, behaviors, and systems. Ordinarily, the pace of change, as indicated by the height of the waves, is gradual enough that, over a period of time, the pace of change feels natural. This state of more predictable change is a state of equilibrium. Then, an event such as COVID-19 hits and creates the conditions for rapid change and adaptation. Now we are in a state of disequilibrium. During a disequilibrium, changes that may have taken a decade or more to complete can happen in under a year. As we move into a new order, the mass pivot point leaves a lasting legacy as societal currents settle back into a new equilibrium and behavioral changes become ingrained, so we can maintain balance and control, build resilience, and prevent future crises. Organizations can use this model to identify the pre-existing societal currents most relevant to the constraints of this mass pivot point, to find signals of acceleration during this time of disequilibrium. Invest now in the hyper-accelerated futures awaiting our new equilibrium.
Okay, so now that you understand the model, you're probably thinking, what exactly is going to be accelerated by COVID-19? So you're probably thinking, okay, what were the societal currents that existed right before? What are the signals of acceleration that we're seeing right now? And then what will happen in our new equilibrium? What we did is we looked at hundreds of societal currents that were happening prior to the pandemic. Systems like omni-channel commerce, behaviors such as like Instacart My Life, attitudes on the irrelevance of cash, and needs like the need for hyper-personalized products and services. And within these societal currents, we now see clear signs of some of them that are becoming hyper-accelerated trends. So the first hyper-accelerated trend I'll share is the age of contactless commerce, which is probably the most evident one that is kind of in our face right now. I'll share the signals of acceleration that point to this. So one is, the system of omni-channel sales. And what we're seeing now in its kind of exponential acceleration is extreme trial behaviors. So one example is in the first week of April alone, 12% of Redfin home buyers purchased a home that they never stood foot in. And if you look at the numbers before COVID, that number was almost zero. Within the behavior of Instacart My Life, we're seeing early adopters become basically everybody adopters. Starbucks, for example, they recently launched 300 more pickup-only stores, and these are all powered by their mobile ordering app. The attitude of preference for cashless spending, which I mentioned earlier, the need to buy certain things in person is becoming irrelevant. So if you've heard of Vroom, they're an online car sales giant, their valuation more than doubled just in the last month. And then attitudes are shifting on the company side as well. So Universal Pictures, they did their first ever direct-to-streaming release, and they did this with Trolls 2. And this Trolls 2 made more money than Trolls 1, not because it was more awesome necessarily, but they skipped theaters entirely, and that really fueled their business model and success. So these hyper-accelerated trends like the age of contactless commerce are helpful, but to act on them, you really need to get to the specific underlying implications for your business. And there are multiples, but we've selected 3 here today that I think are pretty relevant across multiple industries. So I'm going to go through 3 of them. The first is building loyalty by connecting less. So leaders who find ways to take away touch points, particularly within sales and payment processes, for example, will actually build greater loyalty. The second, the rise of predictive commerce. So we're of course at an all-time high of sharing our data online. However, with that becomes a higher expectation among consumers that you'll know what they want before they tell you. And that's something that we have to be ready for and respond to. And finally, frictionless service as the cost of doing business. And I think in the CX community, we've been talking about frictionless service for years. But COVID-19 has finally made it the price of entry, whether you're a B2C or a B2B organization. So what other accelerated future realities should we be prepared for? I'll share a few more today. One is the rise of resiliency over efficiency, and there's the engage customers anywhere movement, and then finally the expectation of business to address inequities. And I'll dive a little bit deeper in each of these three. Let's talk about the rise of resilience over efficiency. So this is really a backlash to the ruthlessly efficient business models and systems that we built as organizations over the years, just-in-time delivery. Well, just-in-time supply chains are turning into just-in-case supply chains as businesses weigh the risks and the trade-offs between these competing priorities. And right now, companies are finding ways to diversify and de-risk. So some signals of acceleration. We see that geographic agnostic talent sourcing. This is something that is going through the roof. And before COVID, this really wasn't even entertained because there were so many concerns about productivity when we're working remote. And as it's proved out in the last few months, for a lot of us, that is not an issue. In fact, productivity has gone up. And just another signal of change, in a recent survey of CFOs, over 54% of them said that they're making working remote a permanent option for employees, and those numbers are climbing daily. And they're doing this because they understand how this better balances efficiency with resiliency through geographic talent sourcing diversity. Another signal of change. Businesses are creating migration strategies for both products and channels. So here's an example, Walmart, their curbside sales channel has increased 400% last month. Now this is a necessary and permanent diversification that's kept them competitive. So that's some examples of accelerated trends and signals. What are some implications and opportunities within this rise of resiliency over efficiency? Number one, investment in what we're calling redundant innovation. So, for example, longer term investments in things that may seem counterintuitive, things like creating excess capacity, lower margin diversification, and more optionality within CX. The next one, earning and capturing more direct data. So businesses will be looking for ways to strengthen bonds with consumers and reduce dependencies on intermediaries. And they're doing this by making investments in front-end digital experiences and building or buying software to earn more direct customer engagement and thereby more data. And three, rebalancing innovation portfolios towards what we're calling new. So new markets and new customers, kind of the fringe of innovation. So corporate leaders are prioritizing this new innovation because so much change is happening so rapidly. Demand is shifting. And this provides multiple options and business ventures that they can have at the ready to respond proactively to rapidly shifting change. So the next hyper-accelerated trend I'll share is the expectation of business to address inequities. So I'm sure it's unmistakable that our country has been on a trajectory of widening inequity, with the pandemic only worsening and exposing this to everybody. So this accelerated trend is really systemic. Some just long-standing trends that we've been looking at. Rates of home ownership have lowered since 2004. Economic mobility has been dropping since the 40s. The top 1% of wealth, I'm sure we all know, exceeds the wealth of the bottom 80%, and that concentration continues to grow. But what's new is that addressing these inequities is now an expectation of business. So what are some signals of acceleration? Chief Diversity Officer. This is an essential executive position, and huge companies like GE, State Farm, Zoom, Harvard, and other organizations have all hired CDOs in the last 2 months. And I'm sure we've read about this. Walmart, McDonald's, Geico, Disney, all these corporate giants, they pulled ads from Facebook to put pressure on its advertising practices. And why? Because their customers expect them to act as responsible community members. So what does this mean for business? Well, there are a few implications I want to share that I think are relevant for everyone here. First of all companies will have responsible design principles. And this is something that we've been developing with a number of our clients. Principles like should before could, provide more value than we capture, and you know what? There are no edge cases. Principles like these inform the design and innovation that we all do every day. The second implication, equity will become a pillar of corporate strategy. It will flow through every process that design and innovation touches, from customer segmentation to design research, how we think about data ethnography, to new product and service development. Which leads me to my third implication, that business offerings are going to accelerate and sustain equity. So more and more businesses will be expected to create products, services, and experiences specifically for the purpose of advancing equity, rather than simply having it be a byproduct or an afterthought. So think of, and if you're not familiar with these, check them out. Startups in the financial sector, Twine, B-Money, and Ellevest. They're all doing exactly this. But it's not just startups that can or will be expected to create these meaningful new opportunities. So for example, at IA Collaborative, our business, we have a Design for Women offering, and we're using this with our Global 500 clients to help them accelerate and sustain equity for that particular segment. So the last hyper-accelerated trend that I'll share with you today is the meet customers virtually anywhere movement. In today's COVID-19 environment, companies are saying, don't come to me, we'll come to you. In industries which have been really slow to adopt virtual technology are being forced to quickly adapt it. So the quintessential example is telemedicine. So maybe you've been a part of this. I know I have in the last couple of months, first time ever. Virtual appointments are up 3,000% at the Cleveland Clinic alone. And this is a very consistent stat that you see across hospital systems. What we're seeing is 30 years of telehealth growth realized within 1 quarter. So in the past, care providers and regulators have been slow to create the systems to support what is really latent and previously existing patient demand. And now they're being quickly forced to adapt. Prior to COVID-19, hospitals and doctor's office would have ranked convenience, sadly, as one of their least important considerations, but now it's flipped. So for example, exhausted cancer patients are now able to meet their specialists virtually and even have phlebotomists come to visit them in their homes. These are examples of massive shifts that providers and regulators are making to meet the shifting needs and demands of patients. And we see this taking place in other areas of commerce. So in our primary research that we conducted, we uncovered large B2B organizations with sales organizations with clients like Pepsi and Netflix shifting to virtual out of necessity because they simply cannot meet with their customers face to face. Well, what's happened is in many instances, this is resulting in more face time, albeit virtual, with their customers, which is leading teams to rethink their sales strategies entirely for the long term. So what are the implications? There's a few, and there's more, but I'm going to share 3 with them with you today. Digital fluency is now becoming a proxy for expertise, which is really unfair when you think about it. People who were previously not judged at all on their tech savvy pre-COVID are now having to immediately upskill because their perceived professional competency is tied to their digital fluency. Think financial advisors, doctors, real estate professionals, really anybody in professional services. Tech fluency for all customer-facing people is now a business imperative. The second implication, salespeople will need a quote-unquote real reason to connect in person, because it's no longer true that customer relationships need to be built on the golf course, nor is it true that big ticket items must be experienced in person. And lastly, demand for digital is expanding, not replacing in-person experiences. So in this post-COVID era that we're hopefully emerging to quickly, digital extensions of in-person experiences will be the expectation, and they're here to stay. Think about telemedicine. Who here really wants to go back to in-person doctor visits for every single thing? So, and then also if you look at like sports and concerts more on the opportunistic side, if you really can't experience being there right from your couch, whether it's through virtual reality or other emerging technology, new revenue streams in massive market size emerges. So these are just a few of the hyper-accelerated trends that we recently studied. And there are, of course, many, many more, and some of them are going to be more specific to specific industries. So we've talked about societal currents and their impact on business. Now, let's talk about what you can do about it, like through business prototyping, to capture new opportunities, to learn and get smart so that you can be going to market with greater intelligence while demand is rapidly shifting and evolving. So I'm sure we're all familiar with prototyping. You know, there's prototyping interfaces, of course, prototyping connected products, built environments through emerging technologies, and even branded communication, making sure we get our messaging right before we go ahead and scale and bring things to market. But what about prototyping an entirely new business? That's a huge part of what we're doing at iCollaborative, and it's what we're doing right now during COVID-19. So we're doing prototypes for prescribable apps, massive air quality software, new financial investing platforms, virtual health offerings. Of course, for obvious reasons, confidentiality, I can't share the ongoing details of this kind of work in progress. But what I did do is I looked back at recent business prototypes that we've done for other clients in recent years. And I've selected one to share today that we did for Nike in their Innovation Accelerator. This is a business prototype, interestingly, that is surprisingly aligned with the COVID-19 accelerated trends that I just shared with you, which is one of the main reasons I wanted to bring it up today. So this prototype was for an incredibly important business at Nike, Nike Team. So Nike Team is the division that makes and sells uniforms and gear for high schools across the country. And we know that based on research, if you put a swoosh on every teen athlete, you'll see a swoosh on that adult athlete. You see, high school, in that moment in our lives, is key to building lifelong customer relationships for Nike's $60 billion business. And at the time, the high school team market was all about high-touch in-person sales. Uniforms were basically sold door to door, and you can see some evidence of what it looked like. And the entire thing was funded by in-person booster programs selling t-shirts in order to afford to buy the uniforms and gear. And our challenge really was to change the game. So to make the experience more personal without being in person, to level the playing field for fundraising, and really to make it more dynamic with digital. So you see, okay, the high school team business was this high-touch analog model where big brands would give physical samples and product details to an intermediary dealer. And then that dealer meets with the coaches and athletic directors, often in person. And then the booster groups are doing all these fundraising events, also in person, to raise the money to buy the uniforms and gear. And it's interesting because Nike's future customers, the teens and the fans, are left out. So we said, how can we change the game? Create a new ecosystem that is low contact, high impact, super resilient, and engages customers anywhere they are. A digital business. A digital business where Nike takes control and becomes a central source of their brand and data. And then we create hyper custom marketing for coaches and boosters, and importantly, fans and teams with their own online store and funding platform. And then what we do is we offer the right dealer partners virtual tools and analytics so that they can close out big deals. So for Nike, this strategy could not happen soon enough, but we also had a ton to learn. So we authentically launched a Nike Team direct business prototype. And we did this with, say, like about 300 athletic directors in just a few select sports. And what we did is we leveraged available databases that had all the high school colors and mascots around the country so that every single athletic director at each school could receive a tailored email in their inbox. And we also leveraged other kind of local key dealers to help facilitate this prototype. And so from that marketing email that went to the athletic directors, it sent them and teams to their own high school branded store hosted on Nike.com. And there you had a full store customized to your school, and you could directly buy simple customized product. And the site also included a crowdfunding and fundraising concept. And we also mocked up the back-end data so that we could understand what Nike would need to track and monitor. So doing all of this enabled us to understand the various business implications, including mapping the value propositions for various players in the ecosystem. So for example, we learned the value of investing in customized marketing like the program that I showed you. Quantitatively, this marketing program earned twice the open rate of Nike's average marketing campaigns, which was already high. And qualitatively, we saw things like teens and teams turning our marketing into their Facebook image, which is kind of a cool, kind of unexpected benefit. But importantly, we learned how the multiple business models that were involved flowed among partners and end users. We learned what data Nike needed to drive it all, and we also learned willingness to pay on their online store. And this enabled us to prioritize opportunities for how truly direct Nike could go, either with or without partners. And then ultimately enabled us to define platform extensibility, how to unlock new revenue, new customers, and competitive advantages over time for Nike. So with this business prototype, in a matter of months, we created a digital business to change the game. Essentially, we narrowed our focus to where we'll make the most money. We defined what the various players in the ecosystem would value most, and we detailed how to scale the experience and business model into Nike's massive organization. So Nike launched their first version of NikeTeam.com with instant customization, direct order options, and an extremely consolidated list of dealer partners. And a fun fact, the digital strategy direct that was created, coming out of this work, also won a South by Southwest Business Innovation Award. So, and it turns out, and this is why I showed this in the first place, that this business is truly built for the long term. It checks the box in all 4 of the hyper-accelerated trends that I shared with you today, from low contact commerce to resiliency over efficiency. You know, we are experiencing a once in a career moment for business prototyping. This is a rare time when 3 things are occurring. Disequilibrium is fueling opportunity. So especially for the bold, those who take risks, smart risks and chances. I'm sure this is something everybody here knows. Consumers are more open to experiments from brands and more receptive to change, and also much more forgiving when businesses try new things. And then 3, demand for new solutions, the new that I was talking about, is far exceeding supply, and it might never be at these same levels again. So what should you do? You should get a team, get your colleagues and leadership aligned, and launch something today, tomorrow, the end of this month at the latest, because risk is still low and engagement is high. So at tools.iacollaborative.com, we have a business prototype charter, a template to help you get started, where you can name and sketch your future offering, define what you might learn from the prototype, and then how you can earn as an opportunity in the long run. So I'll show you how this works with a couple of examples of business prototypes that we're either working on right now or thinking about. So the first example, imagine you're a pharmaceutical company and you're focusing on the age of contactless commerce and how it relates to telehealth. And you declare that you'll prototype the world's first health app store, specifically designed for data privacy and reimbursement. And the market for prescribed apps we know is exploding. It's lockstep with telehealth. So the prototype that we're talking about is going to aggregate those apps and create a marketplace for data. So by doing this, you can learn what all the stakeholders involved in the ecosystem will need. Doctors, pharmacies, insurers, patients, what they might need and want from a virtual app store and the virtual apps within it. And then ultimately, you're doing this so you can earn ownership of the virtual value chain. I'll give you one more example. Say you're a consumer products brand, and this works whether you're Huggies or Louis Vuitton. So say you're focused on being resilient over efficient, especially in your channel strategy, because we know that in-person retail is down and then you're getting more and more dependent on Amazon every day. So you're going to prototype the curated marketplace of your customers' dreams, basically becoming an online merchant for everything else that your best customers are shopping for. So you'll source and sell products that are complementary to your brand via multiple hyper-targeted e-commerce sites and social platforms like Insta Shopping. You'll support it by delivering lifestyle content that your core brand can also leverage. You're going to do this to learn what else your most important customer segments might value. Plus, your company learns how to be more direct and more resilient. And ultimately, the reason you'll do this is to earn more channel independence, more business models, more insight into your customer by owning more data about your customers, and ultimately becoming less dependent on just your offerings and informing what future offerings you might need to make on your own. And you're doing this without massive product development R&D spend. You know, if you're a B2B company or say a services company, you should also consider doing this because, for example, if you're a home insurance company, you could create a marketplace for the fast-growing home repairs market and gain all the data associated that influences and fuels your core. So we've talked a lot about implications and possible next actions today. You may be thinking, where do I start? So we began today by talking about these two critical paths, anticipating accelerated change and prototyping your future business. I want to partner with like-minded leaders that want to create the future of human experience with us. Together, we can dive into the hundreds of societal currents that we've defined, look at the signals of acceleration that are specific to your industry, and perhaps define the 5 or 8 that are most pivotal to your future success. And from there, we can charter and launch businesses to learn where to play, what to build now, and where to invest in the long term. So it's been a pleasure speaking with you today. I look forward to hearing all of your questions, learning about your businesses, your challenges, your ideas. As I mentioned at the beginning of this talk, I'll be at IA Collaborative's virtual booth in Expo Hall when that opens in just a few minutes, and I'll be there Friday as well. So please reach out to me. Also, reach out to me at my direct email address. I look forward to connecting, and thanks for your time.